And I'm going to basically introducing Jessie Becker Alexander. She was the founding CEO of Alydia. I should have asked her how to say Alydia Health. Alydia Health. And she actually, I think she raised 1.5 million initially for it. And it was actually acquired for $240 million. She's actually a program director at FourthWave, and she's the entrepreneur in residence at the Carlsen Center. So please welcome Jessie.
And you forgot
Innovation to start.
Forbes 30 under 30.
Forbes 30 under 30. Did they do that?
No.
Oh,
I got a copy of the magazine.
okay. I'll have to check that.
Yeah. My mom made one. It's in my garage.
Hang it up.
Okay. Yeah.
So usually I like to start, usually when I do these fireside chats, I like to start up like, so the audience gets to know you. So can you tell us a little about yourself, like where you're from? And
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sacramento native. I grew up in Wilton, which, if you're not super familiar with the Sacramento region, is a rural community somewhere in between Elk Grove and Galt. And I went to Elk Grove High School. So I grew up playing soccer, riding horses, and raising pigs. Yeah, that's kind of where I grew up. I went to Cal Poly in SLO, and then spent some time in the Bay Area, and then recently, I guess it feels recently in like a very long time, but 2019-ish, I moved back to Sacramento, and have enjoyed being a part of the entrepreneurial community here.
okay, so your whole your career started actually at Cal Poly, right?
Yeah.
And I think your undergrad was like in entrepreneurship. Was that?
Yeah, I studied business, and I had a concentration in entrepreneurship. Yep.
Right. And so after college, you basically, well, I should say, what did you do right after college? What was your first job after college?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to be at Cal Poly right when they were revitalizing their entrepreneurship concentration.
Mm-hmm.
And they were also, right when I was there, starting their Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship on campus. So I was one of the students that founded the Cal Poly Entrepreneurs Club, and was really involved with all of the very early days of the center there, which was a bootstrap center. And so I had all of this like entrepreneurial experience at Cal Poly, and just really dove in head first and was entrepreneurial in being involved in that scene. And then, yeah, my first job out of college was actually working for the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Cal Poly. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess this leads to like, first off, what does Alydia do?
Yeah, so Alydia Health is a women's health, or I should say was, I guess, was a women's health company. We created a technology that treats postpartum hemorrhage, which is bleeding after childbirth. It's the #1 cause of maternal death in the world. And the burden of mortality is highest in low and middle income countries, although it is still a major problem here in the United States, especially for underrepresented women of color. Our maternal health here is horrible. That's another soapbox that I won't stand on for too long. But yeah, so we created a very simple, inexpensive device called the JADA device that treats postpartum hemorrhage, and works extremely quickly and effectively.
And then, so like, how did you come about? How did you get involved, or what was the origin story of Alydia?
Yeah, so that all just came from me being in the right spaces as a student. The detail of that is there were a couple of biomedical engineering students who were working on a different competition and had come up with this idea for treatment of postpartum hemorrhage. And I met them in all of those student spaces, and eventually joined the team while it was still, a sketch on the back of a napkin. And eventually they both went off and took jobs after they graduated, and I was left standing there kind of like, this is super important. and I think it needs to happen. So I guess I'm the one that's
Mhm.
going to do it. So that's kind of how I got into it. Was a little bit lucky happenstance, but also just being in the right spaces. And
Okay, so the two original inventors or idea people left.
yeah.
What happens next?
Yeah, so this is, all right around the time I was graduating and starting my first job. I met my co-founder, Nathan Bear, who had happened to just move to San Luis Obispo 2 weeks prior with his family. And he has a technical background. I have, a business degree with no experience. And he had a technical background as a mechanical engineer and had worked for several med device startups previously. And I met him, and within a couple months, we kind of said, okay, let's do this thing. Yeah.
So I imagine the first thing as you started working with, it was Nathan, right?
Yeah.
That you had to raise money. At some point, you're like, okay, we got to raise some money.
Yeah.
So tell me how that process went.
Sure. Okay. Well, the high level of the whole fundraising story, just to give you like the full context, is that we raised several pre-seed rounds. We raised a series of 1.2 each. We raised a Series A of just about 2.5, and then a Series B of 10, and then a Series C of 13. So like that's the whole fundraising story, which sounds really impressive, like saying it now. But in those early days, I think our first check was $5,000, and it was like Nathan's friend, and it was great. We were able to get so much done with $5,000, but it was definitely a challenge, especially coming out of school. Here I am, like, I don't know, 21, 22 years old, and trying to raise money for a women's health product, which was not hot and exciting at the time in 2011. It is, femtech is super great now, because go figure, when we're half the population, we need healthcare. But it was tough, but we just leaned into learning as much as we could. We leaned into we leaned into like listening to the feedback we were getting, whether we thought it was valid or not, and tailoring our message from there. So early days, it was a $5,000 check, a $25,000 check, and then those checks got a little bit bigger as we were doing that pre-seed raise. What
was like your first big milestone? You think that you had something to show the people, or that?
Sure, that's a good question. Well, I would say our first major validation, I wouldn't have called it a milestone necessarily, is that we applied and were accepted to the Fogarty Institute, which is based in Mountain View, and it's an incubator for med tech companies. And it comes with a lot of cachet, it comes with a great network, and that was our first like excellent validation outside of our little Cal Poly community. Of course, we had like one little competitions here and there, but that was our first major validation that this was something that other people would be interested in, and that this is a team that they could trust to move it forward. And then, of course, our first biggest milestone was our first in-woman clinical study. That was, of course, by far, that's our first biggest milestone. Yeah.
So I'm assuming with the clinical study, I'm guessing you had to raise money to conduct the clinical study? And how much did you have to raise to do your first clinical study?
Oh, let's see. We probably raised about $2 million before we were able to actually get that first patient in the door. Mm-hmm. Although we probably didn't spend $2 million before.
It seems like that's kind of like a
yeah.
You're reaching out to these investors and you're saying, yeah, we need to do a study, and the study is still like, you never know what's going to happen with the study. So how did you sell that?
Well, I mean, you have different kinds of investors, right? So most of those investors early on were angel investors who are willing to take more of a risk on a potentially transformative technology that might not work, right? So those are the kinds of investors that we had to raise from in the early days, and were great investors for the most part. in order to be able to run that study. And then, when you get a little farther along, then you're looking at more other kinds of funding, right?
Okay. And that was the other thing I was saying. Usually when I talk to startups and they talk about FDA, like I'm usually working with like, SaaS companies, and I think FDA is like, oh my God, that's such a long road.
Yeah.
And what was like your first, okay, you had your study, right? So
Yeah.
how did that study go?
It was incredible. It was an incredibly long haul to get there. We did our first study was designed to be just 10 patients, and we were very narrow in the patients that we wanted to treat as well. We wanted to make sure that there were no like complicating factors. We were just dealing with women who had postpartum hemorrhage due to uterine atony, which is what our device treats, and is the majority of cases of hemorrhage. And it was incredibly difficult to get there because we had this brand new device, but it wasn't just a new device, it was also a new method of treatment. That's the core of why it's been such a transformative technology. And would you guys be interested in hearing that a little bit? Okay, yes. Yes. So really high level background. Postpartum hemorrhage is bleeding after childbirth. And most of the time it's caused because after a woman gives birth, what should happen is that uterus should contract back down to its correct postpartum size. Oftentimes the uterus just ran a marathon of pushing a baby out and is just exhausted, so it doesn't contract. And that's actually what causes the hemorrhage because of how that muscle is vascularized. So the muscle is like a basket weave with blood vessels. And if that muscle doesn't contract, the blood vessels just remain open and just flow with blood. So it's a little, normally when you think of hemorrhage, you think of like a major laceration or something. This is a very different method or reason of hemorrhage. So the core innovation in our technology was actually that we have this very simple silicone device that's inserted into the uterus once hemorrhage and uterine atony is identified. And it basically applies a really low level of vacuum to inside the uterine cavity to evacuate the uterus of blood and collapse it onto itself. And that's what stops the bleeding. It's much different than, so it's a very new method of treatment.
So it's kind of like a balloon, like collapsing into each other's?
Kind of, yeah. Actually, our very first prototype was a trash bag and a vacuum tube, just to show the concept of like, if you suck on this vacuum tube, the trash bag will collapse. Like that was our prototype. So that's the core innovation in our technology. There's nothing really.
How was it treated beforehand? Was it surgical?
So first treatment, and this is still standard of care today after a woman has a baby, is uterine massage, which sounds really nice, but it's actually really horrible and painful. It is literally to get that muscle to respond and contract. The second step is uterotonics or drugs to help that muscle also to contract. And, previous to this device being available, a lot of the game there was a little bit of like wait and see, because the next step was a lot more invasive, a lot more uncomfortable, and not very well loved by clinicians because it didn't work very well. And so what ended up happening is, women wait and see, and you're hoping that they're bleeding less as time goes on, until you have to do something, which isn't good for the patients either, right? So uterine massage, pharmaceuticals. There was another device called a balloon tamponade that did the exact opposite thing. It basically blows up a balloon inside the uterus to apply pressure on those blood vessels, but it's counteracting what the body should do naturally. And then beyond that, it's major surgical intervention. So,
So your study I think was very successful?
Yeah. So that, yes, it was a long road to get there because we had this completely new method, and you're also talking about a highly protected class of patient who has just had a baby, is a new mother, and is in a life-threatening condition. And on top of that, like the whole, well, I won't get into that, but the whole process of consenting people while they're not under duress and being able to treat them when you don't know who's going to hemorrhage, the whole headache in and of itself. But yeah, so we finally got there. We had a 10-patient study in Indonesia, in Jakarta. And our lead engineer, Amy, and our lead scientist, our lead OBGYN were there in person. And it's one of my most vivid memories of the entire experience, actually, is in the middle of, they were just waiting for the right kind of patient to use this device. And I got a WhatsApp in the middle of the afternoon from Amy and just said, like, all caps, it worked. It worked even faster than we were expecting. And that was, like, I still get chills like thinking about it. Like, it went even better than we had thought. We didn't even design the study to measure how quickly it worked. We designed it to, like, measure in longer intervals. That's how amazingly it happened for those first 10 patients.
So after the successful study, what happened after that?
Yeah, so, we had to get through all 10, and obviously N of 10 is still a really small number, but we were able to publish an article in the Green Journal, which is a big deal in the OB/GYN space, on those 10 patients. And we had to basically go raise more money so that we could run a larger study, because our first study was designed just to show safety, essentially. We were also measuring, like, is this going to work, of course, but it was just designed to show we're not going to hurt anyone. And obviously we did that, and then we had to go raise more money to run more studies. And
how much in the second study? How big was that?
So the second study we ran in the United States, and also we had a site in Uganda as well. And that study was, I think we ended up enrolling 106 patients in that study, and that's what we used for our regulatory application to the FDA.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take a step back here. So I'm just trying to put this in context. You just graduated from college with an entrepreneur degree, a business degree.
Yeah.
And now you're like in a startup that's, you're basically doing clinical studies on, medical technology. Like, how did you learn so fast? Like, this, to me, you're like doing something that probably, people have been doing this for decades.
I mean, it was just like drinking from a fire hose as much as I could. There were times that I wasn't learning fast enough, for sure. And times where I realized I had massive gaps in knowledge in the medical device space, just because I was learning exactly what we needed in order to move forward. And then all of a sudden I'd be like, oh, there's like this whole other category of thing that I know nothing about, but would be helpful to know. So, it was drinking from a fire hose as much as I could, and really just being in the right communities. So the Fogarty Institute helped us a lot in terms of being able to learn from the right people, learn, all about the industry and the norms too, that aren't, you can't necessarily find in a textbook, but in a particular industry, there's always norms that I knew nothing about. I was coming from slow, there's not med device in slow. So that was something that was really, really helpful, just diving in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the second study went very well.
Good.
Is this where, after the second study, is that where you started getting looks from other like big medical device companies, or?
That's a good question. So, the med device industry is interesting in that while it's a very long process and it might sound really tedious, it's also, those milestones are like actually really well understood. So, for the first big milestone is your first in-human, right? And then it goes from there. And the industry isn't that huge. So we had conversations with large med device companies really early on, just as kind of a get to know you. We're working on this thing, and you just kind of keep them updated as time goes on. And funny story. So interestingly, one of the things, one of the companies that we formed a partnership with really early on is called Merck for Mothers. It's a subsidiary. I don't know what the format is, but it's basically a corporate responsibility arm of Merck, the major pharmaceutical company, and we actually received some grant funding for them, and so that we could pursue designing the device so that it would be affordable and appropriate in low and middle income countries as well. And from that really early partnership, we were actually introduced to the company that ended up buying the technology. So kind of interesting.
So at what point, so you had, when did I assume you were going through studies, did you actually ever take it to market, or did you get a grant for someone could keep pursuing or keep advancing it?
Yeah, so around the time that the device was being commercialized, I actually stepped back from the company, but the company itself did commercialize the technology for a short period of time before it was acquired. It's a very common time for a medical device to get acquired is after regulatory approval and after some initial proof in the market.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was that like, the whole acquisition process there?
Well, for me, it's actually one of my regrets is that I wasn't in that because I had taken a step back at that point. But I knew, because it's very well understood that when those points were, I knew that they were either raising a Series D or they were having conversations or they're probably doing both. But it was still like a big surprise to me when I got the call from a former coworker that said like, it's actually happening and here's this massive number. That kind of blew my mind. So for me, it was like a call one afternoon. I wasn't a part of the acquisition process. I wish I was, because that would have been great learning. But yeah.
So what now that after that's been done, and so you're done with Alydia, and so what happens after that? Did you just end up coming here to SAC and joining the Carlsen Center? Is that the next stage?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I transitioned out, which was honestly great because for me, like the whole point of starting this company from the beginning was to bring this technology to the women that need it the most. That was the whole point. And like as a recent grad, I learned as much as I could to get it to a point where we were hiring a great team. We raised our Series B, and it was like, you know what? Like I'm feeling kind of redundant right now. We have all of these experts that are excellent at what they do. I don't need to like be the head of 6 departments because we've hired incredible people who are really good at what they've done. So that was like a really great experience for me to say, we've hired these people, they believe in the vision and mission of this company, that it needs to not just be here in the United States, it needs to be a worldwide technology. So I took a slow step back. I kind of worked on the stuff I cared about the most for a while, the global device, and then exited eventually. And then, yeah, I kind of, my husband and I were like, well, maybe we'll go move to Boston for a little bit. Maybe we'll do that. And then we just ended up back here again. And it was great.
Welcome back.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, so we ended up back.
Actually, there's a question I usually ask is like during your tenure in at Alydia, did you have a near-death experience or the company? No, the company.
The company. I mean, we definitely had some tough times. That's for sure. Some of the hardest learning experiences. I would say that they were all let me think for a second and see if there was any that stick out as a good story. But In particular, right when we were going to raise our Series A. So we had done several pre-seed rounds, and we're going to go raise our Series A, and we're getting a ton of pressure to kind of go this cookie cutter med device route where you go pitch to the same handful of VCs that are super familiar with med tech, and then, like I said, those milestones are really well understood. You go to the US, you go to the EU, you get acquired, done. Like, that's the pathway. And that's not why we started this company. We started the company so that the device could be accessible in low and middle income countries. So, I'd go into these meetings, I'd pitch, and we'd get great interest, and then they'd say, but what about this humanitarian thing you're doing on the side? And I'm like, that's not on the side. That is central to what we're doing. And it took me a long time to figure out that that's what was happening, is that we just weren't aligning, that we were not finding the right kind of lead investor. And I think that was probably the closest we got to just not being able to move forward until...
You have to find a different lead investor, or did you have to change your story?
A little bit of both, but it was more a change in strategy. Instead of, going this route that was well understood and was expected of us, we actually had to make some tough personnel decisions. I wish I'd made those decisions more quickly. That was a big learning.
Does that mean you had to fire somebody?
I did.
Okay.
And it was not a popular decision. With lots of people. But long story short, our Series A, we didn't actually have a traditional lead investor because we went and raised from high net worth individuals and current investors who believed in our mission and believed our business story as well as a combined thing. Not you're going to have this technology that's going to make money, and also, yeah, by the way, it'll do some good on the side. So we went and raised from people who believed in that for our Series A, which ultimately was the right decision, but it was a really painful process to get there. But it set us up for the best lead investor ever, which is the Global Health Investment Fund for our Series B, which is a VC that one of their LPs is the Gates Foundation. So their investment thesis is we're going to invest in companies that are going to make money and also do good. And there weren't many of those that existed at the time, but because we didn't go that traditional route, because we found a different way, we were able to ultimately find that right lead investor for our Series B.
Well, where'd you find all these high net worth individuals? Basically from launching out of our entrepreneurial communities that we're involved in. So, at Cal Poly, we had advisors and mentors that came into our programs. And by the way, a lot of them invest $50K here or there or more, right? Mm-hmm. So, launching there and then their networks, and then also through the FourthWave Institute as well. I think it's actually interesting looking at it, between the Cal Poly, you have to go to the Bay Area to get money. And those, through our Series A, I think our funds came half from the Bay Area and half from other places. So it wasn't all the Bay, but yeah, being part of the FourthWave Institute, the Cal Poly entrepreneurial community. So were you I would say, for lack of better, cold calling or sending emails, or were you being introduced hey, this person, you should talk to this person?
More like that. Yeah.
And when you talk to a person, you'd have a 5-minute pitch deck or something, or 5-minute elevator pitch?
Yeah, a lot of time it was, you'd meet for coffee and pull up my computer and I'd run through the deck, and with that kind of angel, it's actually a pretty quick decision for most of them, really. And you go through it, and yeah, they ask do you have any concerns here? What are you thinking? And then maybe a follow up or two to hopefully plug those up, and get we'll check, which is great.
So you had to do a lot, it sounds like you had to do a lot of these pitches then.
Oh my gosh, that was my job. That's what I did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's one thing that, your mission being, getting this tool out to third world countries.
Mm-hmm.
And now that it's been acquired, is that still being accomplished?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It hasn't happened yet, but one of the things I'm proudest of, it's taking a long time, which it could go faster. But one of the things I'm proudest of is that because we really pursued this business model that integrated impact, when we got our Series B from GHIF, we actually signed a binding legal agreement that said that basically access agreements. So, ultimately, like the device will be available within X number of years at, X% of cost to low and middle income countries. So that binding, and there's a lot more to it, but long story short, it says like this technology has to get to these places and has to get there inexpensively. And that legal agreement survived the acquisition. Okay. So Organon, the acquirer, has to do that. And I'd love to help them do it faster, but that's another story. Yeah.
So now that how long you've been with the Carlsen Center for a couple of years now, right?
I started in January of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah. I was really excited to be back on a college campus again.
I think that was like the last. I see Alydia there. That we had to start a weekend a few months later, and that was like the last big event.
It was.
COVID.
I was there. Yeah.
Actually, my son was Oh yeah, so that was
the favorite. That's okay.
Maybe you learn by osmosis. That's my hope. Well, tell me about some of your experiences at the. Oh, tell me what does it mean to be the entrepreneur in residence, and tell me about some of your experiences at the Carlsen Center.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, being an entrepreneur in residence could mean a gazillion different things depending on the organization and the person. For the Carlsen Center, which little plug for the Carlsen Center if you're not already aware, is a wonderful organization. It's not just for students. It's really a central hub for innovation and entrepreneurship in the greater Sacramento region. Great connector. Cameron and Laura are like den mother and Cameron. I don't know.
Den father?
The Cub Master.
Cub Master. I like that. He'll have to tell me. He has a new nickname. Between the two of them, they know everything that's going on in this region. And we have, everything from free events, free speakers to in-depth programs. So we partner with so many different organizations in the Sacramento region to help bolster their offerings as well. Two of which are coming right up. We have the FourthWave Accelerator, which will run this summer. And we're processing applications right now, and the Lean Innovator as well. So if you are working on something on a technology-based business idea and you want to go through kind of it's not a full-on accelerator, but go with a cohort, learn some great tools, and also just kind of like put your feet to the fire, like go practice these tools. Lean Innovator is a great fit, and those applications are open. So just a little plug there.
Any success stories that you like that stand out to you so far since you've been there?
I mean, I think there's a lot, honestly. Yeah, Buzzley's a great one. So, we had a couple of students as freshmen come in through some of our on-campus programs, and they went through multiple of our programs, and they've launched this incredible app that is, they have like multiple contracts with the universities now, which is a really big deal. They're great. So Buzzley's really awesome. They've won a bunch of competitions. I honestly haven't kept all of their accolades like stacked in my head, but Buzzley's a great one. And another great example is a local female founder named Kayleen Canavari, who founded a company called Flexia. She actually went through one of the first versions of the Lean Innovator, and then went through our FourthWave program as well, and got accepted to Techstars, the sports Techstars. And her company has absolutely taken off. I think she's raised, I don't know, like $5+ million at this point, and just a really fantastic success story as well.
And you mentioned FourthWave, and that's more, and you just started that. You're just being the program director for that, right? Or
So, I mean, that's been a partnership between the Carlsen Center and FourthWave since 2020. So I've been a part of running that organization, or running that program since 2020, yeah.
Okay, any interesting stories from FourthWave?
I mean, great ones. Kayleen's a good example,
Kayleen, yeah.
a good local example. Ashita Shah, who's the founder of Microbials, has been through the FourthWave program as well. And we have actually so many fantastic founders that have gone through that program. I'd highly suggest just like going on the FourthWave website and looking at our cohorts. They're all up there. They're all so fantastic and really just inspirational and like badass women. Yeah.
So at this point, I'm going to open it up to questions to the audience. So anybody have any questions?
I was curious about the logistics of some of those trials, because you have to have just a single location, and it seems to me like, sorry, maybe this isn't as interesting to some other people, but would it only be, you would be waiting for someone who had that and then treat them? So that could be pretty lengthy, right? Or did you have to have multi-sites, or?
Yeah, so our first study, it was technically one site, but there were multiple locations for the site, all in Jakarta. I think all of our patients came out of 2 of those locations. But yeah, it was a really complicated process because, as you might know, in order to enroll someone in a clinical study with a investigational device, you have to consent them when they're not under duress, so that they can understand the benefits and the potential harm that an investigational technology could have. So we had to basically consent far more women than we actually treated. So we consented them before they delivered, and then treated them after hemorrhage was identified. And yeah, so it was a very complicated study. Like all of them were.
And you had to have your physician, like your company physician there.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't perform any of the procedures because that's, but you know, in addition to that, you have a massive hospital. So you're trying to catch hemorrhage cases out of many, many people that are giving birth. And you also have to have a properly trained staff that's trained on your clinical study. And they have to be present and treating that patient in order for all of that to happen. So just, yeah, challenging to say the least. So that was our first study. Our US-based study, we had many sites though. So we had grown the organization significantly from then, and I think we're pretty much like all clinical trials.
Single size device, not like.
No, single device. Yeah, no variability there. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just starting your first clinical trial outside the U.S., was that driven by regulations, or was that some other standard process?
It was, I mean, it was a couple things, but really it was partly regulation, and partly it was far less expensive to get to our first patient by not doing it in the United States. We would have had to raise way more money in order to have our first patient be here in the U.S., for better or for worse. And yeah.
And once you had kind of established track record, you were studying without a barrier, you're studying with control.
Yes. Yeah. Because we had these 10 patients that we could go to the FDA with. It was still an arduous process to get clearance to do that study here. But absolutely it was helpful. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The FDA, big corporate kind of interactions there. Did you guys have to work with the patent office and trademark office? Did you have a lot of interaction with them or challenges in getting your proprietary
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the smart decisions that Nathan and I made early on is we worked with a fantastic, almost like boutique IP firm that is super familiar in the medical device space and also physical devices. So it was, we really relied on them to build not just like a single patent, but an entire patent portfolio and a patent strategy that would cover really the method, because it's a brand new method of treating hemorrhoids. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, so it's a women's medical device for women. And you were saying you were doing the pitching, and we know that it's primarily men investing. How did you deal with that, or what kind of approach did you use? Did you feel like you had to do something different than, say, your co-founder? How?
That's a good question. I think if I'm reflecting really honestly on it, I think like that first meeting was probably a novelty for people, because even in the medical device space is also, in the investment space anyway, is incredibly male dominated. And I had those negative experiences where I pitched to a room of an angel group. It was all middle-aged white men, every single one. And the feedback I got from the head of the angel group was, this doesn't really resonate. Like, if it's something that the guys could get, like a hip replacement because their buddy had to get one or something. He literally said that to my face. And I was like, I have not been like struck speechless many times, but that was one time. And I was so thankful that my sassy lead engineer was sitting right next to me. And I think she said something along the lines of like, every one of you came from a uterus.
Understated words.
Of course, there were experiences like that, but at the same time, like we were incredibly passionate, and I had to figure out who was truly going to believe in what we were doing and also believe in us. And I had to learn how to suss that out quickly. Otherwise, I'd spend way too much time on people who, I don't know, maybe we were just kind of a novelty and they thought it was interesting, or, I don't know, we should put women's health in our portfolio. But like, yeah, so it wasn't all bad too. I think, I said it was my job to pitch and raise money. And we were a sexy story. We're trying to save women's lives. And here's this like young 20-something founder that's just like pitching to everybody. So, we got on stages that, because of that too, right? Here's this Forbes 30 under 30, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter if you're on the stage if the people in the audience aren't going to believe in what you're doing. So, we got there.
Your mom made a plaque for you.
She did.
Laura?
So kind of on this, I have some other questions that are more directed at helping other founders, but we're on this thing about this company. So I'm curious, like the major audience that had the problem was people in developing countries. Is that, or it was a bigger problem?
No, I mean, women here hemorrhage as well, just as much in other places.
Is the death rate?
The mortality rate is much different.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, FDA is not an easy process. No. And I wondered if getting approval in another country would have been a faster route to being able to actually treat women.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strategy that we considered at several points along the way. But at the end of the day, I think we'll never know, right? But at the end of the day, I do think that the way that this technology is going to get to the most women most quickly is if it's in the hands of a major medical device manufacturer that has existing distribution systems that they can just plug in and bam, it's being sold everywhere. That's happening here in the United States. So at the end of the day, like the U.S. approval is really important for that reason, because that's the value that an acquirer is buying. But also, there's some regulatory reasons as well. Like because we are U.S. based, getting our FDA approval first makes it easier to get approval everywhere else in the world. So that was a consideration as well. And also, if we were to, there are lots of reasons, but I won't get into like the nitty gritty of it. But at the end of the day, like that was our gut in terms of like what strategy are we going to pursue here? And I think that's what we went with.
And I'm not questioning that decision. I've just known some med tech companies have like done like a dual path, like with a country in Europe and a country here in the US. And I didn't know all their reasons for that. I just wondered if.
Yeah. I mean, it's also a question of funding too, right? Like if you're going to focus on, it costs money to do each of those approvals. So, and we did pursue a more, I guess, an even more globally focused strategy as well, and didn't have as much traction with grant funders like the Gates Foundation. We knocked on that door over and over and over again. I think it was too risky because it was a different method. And for other global health reasons, but.
And this add-on question is just curiosity. Did you guys do animal trials? And is there an animal that is, built like a human woman, like a pig or something that you?
So we did do a couple animal studies really early on, but no, there's not an animal worth studying to be able to approximate this problem.
So is it mostly like an animal study of just like having your device inside them and making sure it does no harm, something along those lines?
It was more to test like the function of the actual vacuum source and the drain to minimize any potential damage to the tissue. So I think we only did like 3 animals or something like that, but it was just like we needed a tissue that was similar to a postpartum uterus, which is also, like hard to simulate, but it was useful, but like we did a very, very minimal, animal studies. Yeah.
I'm not really familiar with the medical device industry, but did you have like any sort of revenue stream, like from licensing or selling, or were you mostly just focused on funding and then waiting until you got an exit?
Yeah, that's the business model for med device startups, is you raise money and the payout is the acquisition. At least that's what most investors, that's their model for making money with med devices, which is part of why we had trouble raising money for that Series A, because they're like, how does going to Uganda factor into this, right? They didn't get it from that perspective. Yeah.
There is a local medtech company, Rivada, who actually does have a lot of reason to. They have revenue right now in the animal industry, if you call it that, the animal industry, while they're waiting to get their FDA, but that's funding everything else. But they have to do with like artificial insemination and selecting the right egg and that sort of thing. So
Veterinary
what?
Veterinary medicine.
Yes. But well, more in farming, actually, in agriculture than in.
Yeah, you're totally right. I shouldn't be so, no, there are some businesses that are able to see revenue, but
most can't. Most can't.
Yeah.
This is what's really unique about Rivada.
Yeah, they have a really cool business model for sure. Yeah.
On your testing, I heard about the foreign study and then the study afterwards. Where did that put you in the FDA process? Are there 3 levels that you had to?
Really that first study was to show some safety, to show the safety profile, so that, and we were able to take that data to do our US-based clinical trial and our study in Uganda as well.
You still had to do a safety trial here though after
So we had to
that.
do safety and efficacy here. So we had to show that our device was equivalent or better than our predicate was the balloon technology I was talking about. That was the predicate that we used, we based our regulatory application on. Sorry, I'm just like busting out jargon. Yeah.
Where were you in the FDA process when the exit occurred? Was it past
we
stage
had-
3? Was it complete
had-
at that point, or was it?
FDA approval, and it was in market.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm doing medically related product more on the drug side,
Yeah.
but some people have like done their exit after stage 2 before stage 3 gets done.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. So it's
Yeah. I mean,
so you were all the way through
and that's,
the entire process.
I mean, that is one of the most common places to exit.
Yeah.
But, a lot of companies exit later after they've built up a strong like sales portfolio. It really depends on the industry that you're in and the technology. Like, how does it plug into an acquirer's existing set of solutions, and how they're going to be able to leverage that technology, that value. Yeah.
Anything? So you didn't really have a medical background. Did you have to recruit either for the team or for an advisory board, people with that medical expertise? And how did you recruit a doctor?
Yeah. I mean, like really early on, like we went and like emailed or found warm intros to all the OBGYNs in San Luis Obispo, which there aren't that many. And yeah, something like that. And we went and like, stole 30 minutes of their very precious busy time to get their feedback on the technology. So that was like what it was like in the early days. And then we found Jan, who actually was a wonderful OBGYN, and he came on actually kind of like part-time consultant and was our main like chief medical source of information. And then we also had a medical advisory board as well.
So I have a question about, you mentioned earlier that there was already procedures in place.
Yeah.
For example, the balloon you mentioned,
Yeah.
and also the massage and the suture.
Yeah.
Like I work with doctors too.
Yeah.
And a lot of them don't like adopting, like, especially like newer technology.
Right.
So what I want to know is, what was kind of like your edge, or what did you do to like convince like doctors or like insurance companies that this is a better solution that's been done before, even after they've done that procedure for so many years and, they trust it, and then now comes a new technology and, they're not totally sure about it. And also, you mentioned there's another device that expanded it. Did you have any other competitors in your space or copycats?
All great questions. So in terms of willingness to use this device, I'll just speak to our experience in the clinical trial that we did here in the United States. We had to recruit a ton of primary investigators, doctors who actually be using the device. Many of them would, first of all, postpartum hemorrhage is one of the worst problems that OBs deal with. And they don't have good solutions for it. So it's a really, really, like if there is something that's better than what they're doing, they want it. So that, that's groundwork laid for a new technology. And part of the reason that it's such a troubling issue for them is because of that wait and see thing that we were talking about earlier, where, you're trying this and you're just hoping that the bleeding is decreasing over time. But there's no immediate feedback that says, yep, I've solved the problem, the bleeding is stopped. And that's what our device did. That's what it does. Within 2 minutes, you can visually see from that drain line, there's no more blood coming out, and you can feel the uterus, which is how they they palpate the uterus and say that uterus has shrunk down and we're good. Nothing else exists like that in that whole treatment path, except for major interventional surgery, which, most commonly, if you have to get there, is hysterectomy. So, yeah. Which is not a good outcome for anybody.
Laura, is that
Does anyone else have? Yeah, but I want to let other people ask if they have them.
so you don't want to be a question hog?
I don't want to get questions. But I'll ask this one. This is not so much about, specifically about the medical device company, but you've been a startup founder and CEO, and now you work with founders, both through the Carlsen Center and also through FourthWave. What is one thing, if there could be one thing that you observe that early stage founders typically, before seed funding or even pre-seed funding, that they haven't focused on enough that they should do more of to help advance the company?
That's a really good question. I see all sorts of founders, all different stages. We were talking, pre-funding. I think one of the hardest things to figure out when you're that early is understanding the nuance of the problem that you're solving. Like really early on, you can be an expert at the problem, an expert at your solution, but getting down to the nuance of why it matters, like what I just talked about there, of that, like, yes, no, it stopped, we've confirmed it. That took years, literal years of understanding that that was the true value proposition of our technology. And active work with OBGYNs and thought leaders to understand that that was the depth of the thing. And it becomes so much easier when you can really understand the full nuance of a problem and get your messaging. And so that's one thing. You can but if you can't message it, then you're like dead in the water, right? Because if other people can't understand why it's important and why they should care, then what are you doing, right? So it's understanding that nuance and then figuring out how to message it in a way that your audience, and not just investors, but anyone that you'll work with in any capacity can understand.
But how would you get to the point of, how would you uncover the nuances? What would be a process for that?
Customer development.
Yeah. That's what I find is most founders don't know what customer development means.
Customer development is wonderful. And basically it's a process of identifying who your customers are or who you think they are, identifying what your biggest assumptions are, and going and testing them and trying to prove yourself wrong, not trying to prove yourself right.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's actually good advice.
Which you do in the Lean Innovator program, you teach them how to do that.
To do that in the Lean Innovator, absolutely.
You actually gave me advice then it was good advice specifically for people that are looking for, they have a medical device that has some sort of FDA requirement, and you want to make sure that it's like
I don't remember.
it was like the compensation, you need to look at compensation, regulation. Remember, if you're looking for funding, it's like you have to look at these three factors, the regulatory.
Oh, the biggest things the biggest strategy things to shore up for a medical device. So yeah, so like any sort of medical product, you want to make sure that your regulatory path is tested and shored up. Your clinical path is, when I say tested, I mean like tested with experts and with potential investors and people in your space. So regulatory, clinical are really like the two biggest things. So that's going to dictate everything else about your business model and dictate how much money you need to raise over time and at what valuations, essentially.
You have some compensation center.
I don't know what
Like how the product's going to get paid for.
Oh, so yeah, I guess that gets to like the true nuance of the problem, right? Like, so we actually didn't pursue reimbursement for our device. I mean, maybe they're doing it now, but we didn't pursue it because there was an existing code that it could just fall under. But beside the point, our sales proposition to a hospital is, regardless of how much the device costs, the money that the hospital is saving is everything from a blood transfusion, which is incredibly expensive, and maybe multiple blood transfusions, We're talking doctor's time, we're talking potential OR time, we're talking extended hospital stay. So when you stack all those things up and say, you know, if you stock our device and you're avoiding this for the, you know, X number of patients that hemorrhage in your hospital, they'll pay tons of money for it here in the United States because it's a cost saving measure for the hospital. So understanding the health economics of a medical technology is super important.
Charlie?
Yeah, so started just out of college, right? Business major, started a medical device company. You've had to have, I'm assuming, had a lot of imposter syndrome issues going on there. And just because every founder does, but I would imagine, and if you didn't, what was your secret not to have that? So what were your sort of, how did you manage that? And do you have any tips for people on?
I mean, yes, I obviously had imposter syndrome, but I also figured out pretty quickly that if I showed any of that, that it was not going to be helpful. It was only going to be detrimental. So I think by nature, I'm incredibly, my parents would just call it hard-headed. So I didn't care. I heard no and I kept going. And when I heard no, you know, every single time I listened to what they said for the reason why and the undertone of the reason why. And then I filtered that. Is that real or is that them? And then I kept going.
Oh, wow.
Did you have mentors that helped you get to that place, or did you do it alone in terms of dealing with, you know, there's things that you've never done before, and you said you learned how to do them. Did you have mentors helping you, or did you have to go alone?
I mean, we sought out programs that were really helpful. I think that, you know, if I could go back in time, I think part of how my imposter syndrome probably expressed itself is that I felt I had to be very perfect externally. So that was harder to find real true mentors that I could tell the real shit to. And I think if I could go back in time, I would find a way to be more genuine in who I am, and still be badass. Like, instead of just like this facade of, you know, I'm going to just do this perfectly. So long story short, I had lots of professional mentors that I'd go to for, like, you know, knowledge, expertise, that kind of stuff. And I had mentors that were outside the space that I could go to with, like, this thing's really hard. But if I could go back in time, I would encourage myself to, like, really find people that truly supported me and understand and like help myself understand the difference if I could do that. But, you know,
That's something you work on a little in FourthWave, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The first time I went, I call it going through FourthWave, even though I was helping run it. I benefited from all of the leadership training incredibly, and it helped me process a lot of that, frankly. Yeah. So after the fact, I wish I'd had it earlier on. Yeah.
Okay, take one more question. You ready? TJ?
I'm really curious about aligning your personal values, your company values with investors. Because several people have told me, yeah, that's a nice window dressing, but at the end of the day, most of them really don't give a shit. And that really bothered me, actually, because I have a similar thought about why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, actually, not any specific question necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, in my personal experience, there were far more potential investors that fell into that camp than didn't. You know, I just had to learn to not take that personally, which I did pretty quickly, probably some of that hard-headed stuff. But you know, the harder part is figuring out, you know, how to suss out in someone, are they truly aligned with our values and where we're going?
Yeah.
And I would be bolder now in trying to figure that out more quickly with people.
I would imagine there's this point where you're like, oh, but I really need money.
Sure. We took, early on, we took checks from angels who were horrible fits and like caused problems for us later. But
Yeah.
frankly, it happens, right? But, the bulk of the people that we raised from early on were aligned and let me be 22 years old and figure it out. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I want to just wrap it up. I do want to point out that this is almost like take your daughters to work day. So that's my daughter Riley, and Alina brought her daughter Bree. Bree, you want to know what you?
Love it.
So you are inspiring another generation. So thank you for coming today. Thank you so much. It was just
Happy to be
wonderful to
here.
hear your story.
Thanks for.
So I'm going to wrap up. Next week, we are having another startup pitch workshop. It's online. If you'd like to either participate or attend, you can either get it at Startup Sac or Startup Folsom, and you can find the event. July 5th here, we're going to have Founders Anonymous, and what that is if you're a founder and have problems, just come here and as a group, we can maybe help you out.
Do you have to wear?
I'll wear the paper bag.
Well,
No, but you do have to start with the whole
July 13th, it's Beer and Geeks, and it's exactly what it sounds like. So have a beer with some of your favorite geeks. And the 19th, we're having a branding workshop here with Josh. What's Josh? Josh
Miller.
No, not it was Josh with Lofty Word.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
So anyway, thank you for coming today. Stick around. Let's talk to each other. Wait.
Can I mention an event? Next week, the Carlsen Center and Startup Sac are having Startup Happy Hour in Rancho Cordova at a new place in the Barrel District there called Drink Easy, which is, he's an entrepreneur too. He's come out with single servings of wine, of good wine, but they have a tasting room, and that's where we're having
What
it.
day is that on?
What?
What day is that on?
It's on Thursday, June 29th from 5 to 7 p.m.
Okay. All right. And anybody else, any other announcements? All right, so yeah, stick around. We still have a lot of pizza. If you want, take some home, because otherwise I have to take it home. And thanks for coming today and being part of the community. So.